All right, if you look at question number 1 on your handout, the question is, have you ever seen success or popularity change a person in a negative way? Anybody ever seen that? Seems like that's kind of the norm, isn't it, in human society? A lot of times when we experience success or our popularity goes high, then what does that tend to do? Yeah, it kind of inflates our ego a little bit, doesn't it? Makes us feel proud. I know I mentioned time and time again, but I like sports and I like professional sports. Not much for college or high school, but I like professional sports, and I'm always amazed. Some of these guys who come into that area when they're really young, they're super talented. I mean, they're just so humble. But it seems like the longer they stick around and the better they do, it just seems like they develop an ego and a sense of pride as they get toward the end of their life. And just kind of human nature, isn't it? When you experience success or, if your popularity is way up there, then it kind of tends to have a reaction of pride, I guess, within ourselves. We're going to read about Gideon tonight. And Gideon has just experienced a tremendous victory, of course, by the hand of God over the enemy. And, of course, he delivered Israel out of the hands of their enemies, too. Would you think, as you read through chapter 8, hopefully you've read through chapter 8, but do you think that success or that popularity changed Gideon in any way? No. Okay, got one who says no. Anybody disagree? Be hard not to? Okay. Anybody else?
He built an ephod that kind of looks like it's looking beat up. Because he took the spoils and built this ephod.
Right.
Town. It doesn't look like it's there. We got something they worship both.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Maybe we'll have more time as we get toward the end of the chapter tonight and talk about this a little bit more, but maybe we'll see if there's any way that it changed him, that success or that popularity. But it's a good thing to think about, kind of the idea we're going to drive toward, at least toward the end of our lesson. So if you're not already there, Judges chapter 8, I'm going to read the first 3 verses here, and then we'll talk a little bit, answer some of these questions. It says, "Now the men of Ephraim said to him, 'Why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight the Midianites?' And they reprimanded him sharply. And he said to them, 'What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeeb, and what was I able to do in comparison with you?' Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that." So question number 2 deals, next couple questions actually on our handout, deal with Gideon's interaction with the tribe of Ephraim. And question 2 is, why were the Ephraimites upset with Gideon?
It seems like they were mad that he took all the glory.
Okay?
You didn't call us, you went to battle without us, which means we didn't get to keep glory on ourselves and the spoils.
Yeah, they were upset because initially, remember in the beginning, before the battle ever occurs and before the troops are cut down, Gideon summons an army, doesn't he? But evidently he didn't summon anybody from the tribe of Ephraim. Why do you think that is?
I think I read, I'm not positive, that they were the largest tribe.
I think, weren't they, that may be right. I was thinking they were the second largest. I was thinking,
They were one of the
yeah, they were one of the top ones for sure.
So maybe they had a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah, and when you study about them, they were a pretty proud tribe. They really were. But why did Gideon do the things that he did? Where did he get his plan? Yeah, it was a divine plan, wasn't it? God told him to do these things, and he told him how to do it. He told him where to get the people from. So it wasn't like, Gideon was purposely shunning this tribe. He's just following this plan that God has given to him. But didn't keep the tribe of Ephraim from feeling snubbed or insulted. And you kind of ask the question, what was their motive behind this? Why would they come to Gideon? They just experienced a great victory. I mean, why would you bring this up? What kind of impression do you get? No right or wrong answer, but what kind of impression do you get about these people?
He's kind of like they're jealous.
Yeah, I would think so, right? That's kind of the impression I get. They wanted a piece of this glory, didn't they? They wanted to be able to share in this victory and claim some of it for their own, and probably claim some of the spoils from this too, because there was a lot of bounty that was left over in the conquering of this enemy. They weren't called, and so they didn't have any part, at least in the beginning of it. So maybe there's a little bit of greed behind them too that was motivating them.
Well, everybody was afraid to fight these big guys. They were all afraid to fight. And then when he whipped somebody, he said, "Why do you call me?"
Yeah.
That's like,
Yeah, that's a typical buddy response, isn't it? When you get done doing a big job and your buddy says, "Hey, why didn't you holler at me? I would have come help you," right? That's kind of the idea behind it. Wes, did you have a comment?
Well, in the previous chapter, after they had the big battle and they didn't summon the Ephraimites down, it kind of feels like you had to come down to just kind of do the cleanup, the dirty work a little bit.
Right.
Maybe that's where that's coming from.
Right. Their job was basically to block the Jordan River. It wasn't keep any reinforcements from coming over. But like Wes pointed out, that was after the initial battle had taken place. Gideon does call to them and give them a part, at least in that. But evidently they were offended they weren't called from the beginning. Had a part in this from the very start. So question number 3 here: what strategy does Gideon use to try to appease the tribe of Ephraim?
racks them up.
Yeah, this was a pretty volatile situation. It could have gone one way or the other. Gideon shows a lot of wisdom as a leader, I think, and as a person, because, he could have basically just told them how it was. But instead, he chose a different avenue, a different approach. And he chose a soft answer. The Bible tells us, Proverbs 15, verse 1, what does a soft answer do? Turns away wrath. Yeah, turns away anger. And he wasn't wanting to fight. He just finished a battle and a war. He wasn't wanting to fight with his own countrymen, so he was trying to establish peace among them. And so he kind of boosted their ego a little bit, didn't he? He said, well, we went out here and we fought this battle, and yeah, sure, we won, but we didn't do anything compared to what you guys did. You guys captured 2 of the chief captains, the commanders of the enemy army. So you guys were a tremendous part, in this victory and in this battle. Do you think that Gideon meant that? I don't know. It's a good question, isn't it? It was a very smart strategy, though. I'll at least give him that much. And I don't see anything, at least initially in the story, to show that Gideon didn't sincerely feel that way about what they had done, the great victory they helped them accomplish. So Gideon starts going through the country, pursuing after the rest of this army. If I can, somebody read for us, read verses 4 through 9 there, Judges chapter 8.
When Gideon came to the Jordan, he and 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted but still in pursuit. Then he said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people to follow, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian." And leaders of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand
Okay, so again, Gideon is hot on the heels of the enemy. He's pursuing after them. And one of the first cities that they go through as they're pursuing the enemy is Succoth. And what does Gideon ask from the men of Succoth, or the people of Succoth? Yeah, they needed some supplies, didn't they? I mean, obviously, they were exhausted, and this was, as far as we know, did they take anything with them? I mean, the Bible says all they had in their hands were their pitchers and their trumpets and the lights. Of course, some of the people that were called might have brought something, but this particular squadron that Gideon is leading, they were exhausted and they'd run out of supplies. So they needed food and to keep on going and to finish this battle. So the men of Succoth weren't willing to help, right? And why were they not willing to help here? Question number 5. What'd they tell Gideon?
They thought they were in cahoots. They thought he was on Gideon was on their side. I mean, that's what they say.
Yeah, well, they're afraid to help Gideon out, right? And why would they be afraid to help him?
They don't expect him to be successful.
They think he's gonna win.
That would be the obvious implication, wouldn't it? I mean, if you knew Gideon was going to win, wouldn't you go ahead and help him? They said, where are these 2 guys you're pursuing here? Have you captured them yet? Have you overcome them? What was going to happen to them if they helped Gideon and then Gideon ended up not winning? Well, that would have come back on them, wouldn't it? The enemy would have come back, of course, wiped them out or finished them off. But they not only refused to help Gideon, but they kind of made fun of him a little bit, They said, here you are thinking you're going to win this battle. I don't see anybody. You see any captives behind you? You see any commanders of the enemy?
You got one bunch mad because the next couple, then the next bunch said,
Yeah, and that was the days of the judges. I mean, everybody did what was right in their own eyes and went their own way. And that's basically what you read about as you go through the book. But it kind of indicates they didn't think that Gideon was going to win this battle. They didn't think that God was going to give him a victory. And of course, they feared vengeance. They feared the enemy coming back upon them for helping him. So how does Gideon respond? He runs into Succoth, he moves on to Penuel, and of course he gets the exact same response there. How does Gideon respond to those people who refuse to help him? What question are we on here? Number 6? Go ahead, Dennis.
I'm coming back.
Yeah, his theme was basically, you guys are, you're traitors, you're unpatriotic, you're not for this nation and for our people. And when I come back, after I do catch this enemy, I'll come back and deal with you guys then. And, you think about, can a person remain neutral in a battle? You're either helping one side or the other, aren't you? And so by refusing help to Gideon, who were they helping? They were helping the enemy, weren't they? They were helping the Midianites. Jesus talked about that concept in the spiritual war, Matthew 12 and verse 30. We can't be neutral, right? Somebody said, well, I'm not really for Christ, but I'm not on Satan's side either. Does that work? Jesus said, if you're not with me, what? You're against me. Kind of the same idea. Yes, sir.
How many men does it say, did I miss it? Does it say how many men he has with him while he's pursuing these 2 kings?
I don't think it does anywhere.
I mean, my assumption is it's roughly the same to 300 that he had when he circled, 100,000 people in territory.
Yeah.
So these people are like, here, because it says a little bit later that the kings have like 15,000 men.
Yeah, there's still significant.
So these 2 towns, yeah, they should have supported Gideon, but if we saw 10,000 people go by here and then 300 come by on saying, I'm going to get him, you have fun with him.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how anybody would react.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I don't remember reading anything. Does anybody else come across anything or know something right offhand about the number that Gideon has with him right now?
Verse 4 says that there was 300.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, so there we go. That would make a lot of sense then, wouldn't it? You know, there are 300 men chasing 15,000. They have, yeah, but they still got 15,000 to go. So I guess they thought probably wasn't going to happen. And from a human standpoint, it would seem unlikely, wouldn't it? Seem unlikely that they could go ahead and finish off this army and win this victory. So anyway, glad you brought that up, David. Helped me out a lot. He basically, you know, told them, you know, when I'm going to go deal with the enemy. When I come back, I'm going to deal with you traitors. And so that was a threat, wasn't it? So we're not going to read all this chapter, but question number 7 says, what shape was the Midianite army in at this point? I think we mentioned how many followers did they have left?
15,000.
Yeah, about 15,000. How many have they lost? 120,000. So, you know, that's pretty close to 90% of your army that you've lost in this battle. So were they significantly smaller than when they started? Yes. Were they still large in number compared to Gideon and his army? Absolutely. But one of the lessons I think that we get from this is, you know, Gideon just kept on pursuing him, and he persevered. He endured. He won the battle. That's something as Christians we got to be willing to do too, right? You know, just keep on going. Keep on doing what God told us to do. Eventually, it'll pay off. So we read about Gideon capturing the enemy. He comes back. Question number 8 here. What does Gideon do when he returns to Succoth? Okay, one of the first things he does is he captures one of the young men, one of the citizens of the city of Succoth, and he inquires about, you know, who all are the leaders in here. Kind of gets the idea of the people that he needs to single out to make an example of in front of everybody. And so, what does it say that he did to those in Succoth?
Welcome into the wilderness of briars and thorns, and I guess kind of taught them a lesson.
Yeah, and a lot of people believe that just refers to the idea of they publicly scourged them or whipped them in front of everybody. Now, as you read on and go to Penuel, what does he do to the men there? Yeah, it says he killed all the men of the city, right? Some people believe it's not stated in the Bible there. The only thing that's stated about Succoth is that he whipped them, but some people believe that was kind of the fire before the storm, if you will. After that, he put them to death. And kind of like the Romans did people, you know, you make a public example of them, then you put them to death in front of everybody. So, I don't know. It doesn't make much sense that he leave one group of people and kill another group of people if they both responded in the same way. But what do you call what Gideon did? You call that murder?
Well, could you call it murder because it's in wartime? The soldiers?
I would say you'd call it justice.
That's what I would say.
Wouldn't you? Because they had clearly sided with the enemy. I mean, they weren't for Gideon. They weren't fighting for Israel. They were the enemy. And so Gideon, I think in his mind at least, he's just finishing off the enemy. You know, just finishing off the rest of them.
Would you call it revenge?
Justice. Seems like it to us. It was vengeful, wasn't it? It was certainly vengeful. It was retribution for what they had done and how they had acted. But I think the main element that's put in there is it's the idea of, you know, those people were traitors. They refused to help God. They refused to follow his plan to help the army that was following it. They didn't believe Gideon was going to win the battle, did they? We already kind of read about that implication there. And so I think in the mind of Gideon, they were guilty of assisting the enemy. Of course, Gideon talks to these two kings that he captures. And who do they admit to killing, these two kings? Look at verse 18.
His brother.
Yeah, so they evidently, now this probably isn't while they're running away, I don't think. I think this is probably a different incident that took place at Tabor whenever, we read about these times when the enemy would come down and launch attacks upon Israel. And it's probably one of those attacks that the brothers of Gideon were killed by these two men. And so they admit to killing Gideon's own brothers. And what does Gideon do to these two kings? Yeah, he said, if you had not killed my brothers, then I would have let you go. But because you killed my brothers, I'm going to kill you. And again, this is, to us, that seems, like Danny kind of pointed out there, seems like revenge. But who administered justice in this day and age? There weren't any, governmental officials in Israel or anything like that. Remember, God was their king. These judges were raised up temporarily to kind of rule over the people. And so Gideon has kind of been pushed to the forefront of this idea of a ruler, or at least a leader over the children of Israel. And if they had murdered these people, then of course, what does the Bible teach about that? Well, they deserve their lives deserve to be taken also. He kind of does it, though we might think of it in a weird way, but who does he offer, I hate to say the honor, but that's kind of what it was like to them, the honor of avenging his family. Yeah, his oldest son, right? And so he gave him the opportunity to kill these two great kings, or leaders of the army. Now, you have to understand a couple things. This goes back to one of the things we started talking about, and that is the idea of pride. In that day and age, pride was about everything if you were a man. It still is, I guess, if you're a man. But two groups of people you didn't want to be killed by if you were a man. Who would those be? You got any idea? A woman, right? We know that. If you were a great soldier and you were killed by a woman, that's, that was like suffering the ultimate shame, the ultimate disgrace in that day and age. Who would be the second group?
Yes, child.
Children, right? How could you be a great warrior and be killed by a child? And so these two men did not want this child to kill them. And they're kind of egging Gideon on. They're saying, why don't you be a man and kill us yourselves? Gideon was looked at as a leader and a powerful soldier, so it would have been more honorable for them to die by his hands than by that of a child. So anyway, he offered that opportunity. The child, the Bible says, was just too young. He was afraid, and you can understand from a youth standpoint how difficult that would have been. Some of the fears that a person might have. But Gideon does execute them. He also claims some trophies from his victories. What does he claim?
Ornaments of camels.
Yeah, the ornaments, the golden ornaments, and part of the kingly purple and all these things that these kings would have been carried with them would have been, if you killed somebody in battle, basically that whatever that person was carrying belonged to you. And so that's kind of the idea or the concept that you get as you go through this story too. Again, I think about the idea of justice. If you're going to run any kind of civilized society, do you have to have justice? You have to. It's a must. It's a staple, isn't it? And so in my mind, what Gideon is doing here is he's making things right. He's establishing justice, trying to get this society up and running again. So we go on, we read about Israel's response to Gideon, and let's look at verse 22 here, Judges chapter 8. It says, Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, Rule over us, both you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. So you have this interaction between Israel and Gideon after this battle. And what do the Israelites want from Gideon?
Basically, remain king.
Yeah, they want to make him a king, don't they? They actually want to establish a royal dynasty. That's their idea. We want to make you king, and then after you die, we want your son to be our king, and then after he dies, we want your grandson to be our king. And so they made him from a human standpoint. That would have been a hard thing to turn down. You know, how many people today, if you were offered one of the top jobs within your area of expertise, would say, I don't think I'll take that. I mean, that's basically Gideon was turning down, you know, the idea of him ruling over them and also setting up a royal dynasty, his family ruling over them for years to come. So the question is, number 12 here, why did Gideon refuse? Yeah, he declared the Lord as their king, right? Gideon was smart enough to know, did he win this battle? Was he the reason they won? No, the reason they won was because of God, right? The reason they won is because they listened to God and they followed his plan. They let him rule over them and he gave them the victory. And Gideon was not going to take credit for that. You know, he was not going to put himself in the shoes of God and start taking the credit and the praise that belonged to him. Gideon clearly announced, the Lord is our king. He's the ruler over us. I'm not going to be your king or your ruler. So how would you say, question 13 here, how would you assess Gideon's response to his newfound popularity? Well, if that was the end of the story, I would say he passed with flying colors, wouldn't you? I mean, you say great. But unfortunately, there's some things that pop up as we go on here that are at least questionable in nature about Gideon. So somebody read, we got about 5 minutes here, somebody read verses 24 through 28 for us here in Judges 8.
Yet Gideon said to them, I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil, for they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They said, we will surely give them. So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw earrings there from his spoil. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, and the pendants, and the purple robes, which were on the kings of Midian, besides the neckbands that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made it into an ephod, and placed it in his city oak, and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his husband also. Can you say 28?
Yes, sir.
So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore, and the land was undisturbed for 40 years.
Okay, so question 14 is, what does Gideon ask from the Israelites? He wouldn't be their king, but he said, I do have a request. There is something that I want to ask of you. What do you ask?
He asked for a reward.
Okay.
He said, I want to get paid.
He asked for gold, right? All these enemies that they killed, they were famous for wearing golden earrings. And so, again, there was a lot of plunder that was left over from the battle itself. And so Gideon said, I want you to give me the golden earrings from these people. The Bible says that the people gladly did it. You know, they weren't objecting to it in any way. He didn't rob them. But what do you think about that request? Let me put it this way. Did Gideon have anything yet from this battle? What did he get? Yeah, he got the ornaments and the gold chains off the camels, and the Bible also mentions some purple that came. Listen, Gideon was already rich. He was already set for life. When you stop to think how plentiful was gold in Israel in that day and age, not very, because these people had robbed them to the point that they were the poorest of the poor. So he was already set for life. But he asked for this gold, and one of the things that, again, it's kind of put into the measure of that day and age, but one of the things that I read about it was this is 43 pounds of gold. Okay, he does make an ephod from it. You think he put 43 pounds of gold in that ephod? I doubt it, because you probably couldn't wear it if you did. And to kind of equate that in our day and age, $657,561 is what it comes out to in our day and age. He already had something. He already had enough to live the rest of his life. But now he gets even more from them, right? And so from that, at least in part, he makes this golden ephod. And what's the unfortunate outcome of that? Question 15 here. Let me stop here and ask you this. Why an ephod? What's the significance of an ephod? It was a garment that was worn by the high priest alone, right? And it was used in worship to God, and it was used to, remember the two stones that they had, the yes and the no stone, to inquire of God and to find out what God's will was. So why would Gideon make something like this?
I'm assuming he's not wearing it.
I don't know. Doesn't really say, does it? But it's not a black and white answer, but do you think his intentions were noble? That's my question.
I know it's called it, he made it as a symbol of him being civil power, not priestly power.
Okay? And it kind of makes sense, if this is like the priest or the ephod that the priest wore, where you come and you ask God, this became a source of idolatry for the people. Maybe they thought, well, we can find the answers to our problems here. If we got a question, we'll just go with this ephod. And eventually it was set up and became an idol for Israel.
I wonder if it's, I'm going to call it misguided faith. So God's been talking to this guy for quite some time. And now the battle is over. We can assume, since this was clearly a bad idea, that God has stopped talking to him, at least for this little time frame. But if you talk to God regularly, you might get in your head that you're going to miss peace. And I'm not just saying that he made a good choice, but I'm not sure that it was all greed, pride, so much as it's, if he's a faithful follower of God, he was trying in a misguided way to show, which kind of goes to the point that you can worship wrong.
Yeah.
You can be sincere and be showing respect to God and still be wrong.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't know what the motive was behind it. I will say this, though. At the very least, it was tremendously unwise. Would you agree with that? Because this was people who were prone to idolatry. You start building stuff, and memorializing stuff and setting things up. Well, even Gideon's own house, right? His father was the one who had Baal's altar on his own land. But it's tremendously unwise to put people in that situation, even put himself in that situation. But eventually, it turned bad, didn't it? He refused to offer to be a king, but yet he lived like one. He got all this money from this battle. Also, did he have very many women? Well, he had 70 sons, so I would assume he had quite a few women, right? Interesting, when you get over into chapter 9, read about Abimelech. Abimelech is from one of these concubines, one of these maidservants of Gideon's wife, which probably indicates she was a Canaanite. So, think about Gideon. I don't know. I always have mixed feelings about Gideon. He did a lot of good stuff. There's no doubt about it. But there were some things that he did that were pretty questionable, too. And so these people we read about, at times they had great faith, but they were just human like we are, too. And what happens after Gideon dies? Yeah, it's like Israel, just waiting for these people to pass on so they can go right back, where they came from. As long as they're alive, they're going to honor them and what they did, but as soon as they're dead, they turn right back into idolatry. Okay, so anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions before we end tonight?